The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Alan Bumkin. I'm here with my good friend David Nemec for another session of David Nemec's Trivia and History. Welcome, David.
Welcome to you, Al. Good to be with you again.
Yeah. Today we're going to discuss four more teams, the second four teams in the original American League 8 with their best and their worst. So, pre-expansion.
Seasons prior to expansion, yeah.
Prior to expansion. And so let's get started. Who do you want to do first?
Well, we could take the White Sox, if you like.
Okay, yeah. Their best team probably was 1917.
Okay, I would go with either 17 or 06. Cases can be made for both, but you're right. They both won the series. The 19 team was probably better in personnel.
Yeah,
but of course,
we all know that what happened there.
So much luster. It's pretty hard to rank them among great teams. And the 59 pennant winner was a solid team, but not as good as the Indians, who should have won that year. So I think you're right, Al. 17's a pretty good season. I can make some defense for 06, but 17 is just as good. So
and the worst, I was looking at this a couple of weeks ago. I had a terrible season. I think 1948 and 9 was terrible.
They were terrible in the late 40s.
Yeah, and they were terrible. I think they had a terrible team in the 30s at one point.
1931.
Yeah,
they finished in last place. I'm pretty sure that was their first last place finish.
Yeah.
And they had 3 Hall of Famers on the team who spent their entire careers in White Sox uniform. Luke Appling.
Yeah, Tread Lyons, and who was the third one?
Red Faber.
Oh,
Faber
God, he was still around then? God, yeah.
He was still around. Yeah, he was still around. And, he actually was 10-14, had a pretty good record, had the best whip on the team among starters. It was, for him, all considered one of his better seasons. He was 42 years old at the time.
Wow.
The rest of the staff, Lyons had a bad arm for much of the season. It was injured. Really only pitched 101 innings and wasn't much use. He only started 12 games. But they had the immortal Pat Carraway, who was the only man to strike out Joe Sewell twice in a game.
Yeah. And
Tommy Thomas, who was a pretty good pitcher during that era, and Vic Frazier. That was their pitching staff. Hal McCain, Garland Braxton pitched a little bit. All these guys had some good seasons, 1 or 2, but none of them could come together really in 1931. And what really hurt them was their terrible hitting. They had a former batting titleist in 1929, Lou Fonseca, but by 1931 he was playing the outfield and he had 299, and the only hitter of any substance at all was their first baseman Lou Blue, who was probably one of the most forgotten names from that era, but he had a long career, a fruitful career, and he really walked a lot and played his best, and usually was with pretty rotten teams. And he led the team in hitting in 31 with 304 average and an 829 OPS. And they had guys that had good years and other years, like Billy Sullivan and Carl Reynolds.
Billy Sullivan Jr., right?
Billy Sullivan Jr., right?
Yeah.
And Fatty Fothergill, who was always a tremendous hitter with Detroit, but didn't do much. He only had 282 and 31 with the White Sox. And this was a hitter's year, and and the team batting average, was pretty much what sunk them. It was only 260. The pitching probably would have gotten them into 6th or 7th place. It was good enough. It was good enough to do that, but the hitting was devastatingly bad for.
Well, I think that. Do you think they cut they changed the ball because of what happened with the hitting in 1930?
There's talk of that. Yeah, I don't know whether it's true or not, but your case 31 hitting did drop, and it started in 32, 33. It continued to drop. It wasn't the 30 season was out of sight, and some of these guys even in White Sox uniforms were hitting over 300 in 1930. They had some interesting guys on the team though, like Smead Jolly.
Oh yeah, couldn't field. Yeah,
couldn't field.
Pacific Coast League All-Star. Yeah.
Pacific Coast League All-Star, came to the White Sox, played 54 games, hit 300. Probably didn't field much higher than that, but if you really looked at him carefully. But Carl Reynolds led the team in home runs with 6, and also led an RBI with 77. And those figures just weren't going to cut it in the early 1930s. And so their hitting is what sunk that team. And I would pick that as, but I agree with you that the teams in the late 40s were atrocious. And they only avoided the cellar because the Browns in Washington were not doing much better in those years. But I can pretty safely say I think that 31 was the worst, and 17 I would agree with you was the best team. And some of the guys on that team are who would you rank among the really top players in that 17 team?
Oh well, you got Joe Jackson. You've got Eddie Collins. You've got Happy Felch, Buck Weaver, and Ray Shaw.
Yeah, those are all really good ball players.
Yeah,
and but their infield was really pretty solid.
Yeah,
and even Chick Gandil. I mean, for that, it was still the dead ball era. And Chick Gandil even had not a bad season. And Collins, I had for him a very bad season. He only had 289.
Yeah.
And Swede Breesberg, the shortstop, only had 203. But Weaver hit 284. They really weren't much more than the hitless wonders in 1906. And they really won it with Jackson, as you say. Jackson had an off year, really. He hit only 301. But their pitching staff with Seacott, Faber, Lefty Williams, Reb Russell, those were solid pitch. All 4 guys were solid pitchers in the late teens.
I just finished the biography of Eddie Seacott that came out 2 years ago. It was written by David Fleitz. I don't know if you know the name.
I do, and he's a very good writer.
I know that. Yeah, his stuff is usually well researched and well written, and the book was fascinating, and it delved into Seacott's whole. I think he had a big year in 1917.
Yeah, he did. He was 28-12.
Yeah, and in the 18 he slumped off because most of them were away. Not playing because of World War One, and then he had a big year in 19, and of course
and
the rest is history.
He had a pretty good year in 20, and then it was all over for the.
And he pointed out that the White Sox in early September lost 7 games in a row to teams that they shouldn't have lost to.
Yeah.
And there are people that think that the gamblers had them by the hook, so they manipulated the number of games in the 1920s.
Yeah, that's quite possible. But the 17th team, it's interesting because Faber ended up pitching for what we consider both the best and the worst White Sox team.
Yeah, wow.
In the course of his career. Yeah. There was another guy on the list who played for both the best and the worst teams, but not for the same team in each year.
Yeah.
And we might want to move to them next. That's the Cleveland Indians, who were known early on as the Naps.
Yeah.
And if we go to their worst team, the only team that representing Cleveland in the American League prior to expansion that finished in last place was the 1914 team with shoeless Joe Jackson. And the team in spring training, preseason, even in the early season, gave no sign, no hint of being such a terrible team. Nap Lajoie finally had been replaced as manager after years of a fruitless search for a pennant under his helmsmanship that never quite paid off. And we talked about him before, that he really wasn't a great leader. He was a great player, but probably not the guy you wanted to be running your ball club. And it was turned over to outfielder Joe Birmingham, who wasn't really any better. And so you had Lajoie, Joe Birmingham, and you had shoeless Joe Jackson, Ray Chapman. You had a cast of characters, really good ball players on the surface, and they were expected to finish at least in the first division, and with luck, maybe even be a contender. What probably hurt them more than anything was Veen Gregg, who had broken in with 3 successive 20-win seasons. And then in 1914, arm trouble caught up with him and reduced him to only a part-time pitcher, and he never again really was.
Yeah, I remember that name. I remember doing some research on him about years ago because the fall-off was very dramatic.
Yeah, it was, and it was unfortunate because he was so good for those teams that Cleveland really believed that that they really had a shot at the pennant. And if you read the early season newspapers, there was talk of the possibility this might finally be the Naps year to break through. And as we know, it didn't happen until 1920. But the 14 team did have some interesting pitchers, even though they weren't great. They had Guy Morton, a rookie, who started his career losing his first 13 decisions, and ended up 1-13 with an .071 winning percentage. And the staff leader was a guy named Willie Mitchell, who was a quality pitcher, pretty much in the teens. Never a great pitcher, but had a good career, solid career, and ended up spending 11 years in the majors, most of them with Cleveland, and finishing with Detroit. He was probably their best pitcher by far. And the other guys, Bill Steen, Rip Hagerman, Fred Blanding, none of them were anything to really rave about. Although, they did have some, in the dead ball era, they didn't post what looked like bad ERAs or bad whips. I know. It was definitely overall, and the team just didn't gel. They had Steve O'Neill. He was up as a catcher. They had guys who were on the 1920 team. Doc Johnson was the first baseman on the 20 team. Ray Chapman, of course, was on the 20 team until he was killed. And then Jack Graney was on the 20 team. So they had the makings, and Bill Wamsgans was on the team. He had the makings of what would be a pennant winner in the 1920, but it took him an awful long time to get there. And
well, I didn't get to speaker until after 1916.
Yeah, right. And that changed the complexion of the ball club immediately. Yeah, he was the first really good player they had, Jackson was a good player too, and he did hit 338 for the terrible 1914 team, but they really were hard pressed, even in attendance, because with the Federal League in existence, the American Association put a minor league team in Cleveland, and the minor league team was almost a bigger draw than the Naps.
Oh, wow!
So they were in tough shape in 1914. They came out of it in 1915, finishing 7th, which was not a great improvement, but at least they got them out of the cellar. And from then on, they started moving up the ladder. By 1918, they were definitely a contending team. So I think we can safely say that was their worst team. And what would you think their best team was?
Probably either 1920 or 1948. It was the only 2 World Series they won.
Yeah, that's the only series they won. Unfortunate that the team that still holds the record for the highest winning percentage by a pennant winner, the 1954 club, which won the pennant with ease, does probably, in the eyes of most Cleveland fans, take a back seat to one of the 2 pennant winners. I would go ahead.
The thing with the 54 Indians is that if that first game had been played any place else but the Polo Grounds, the Indians probably would have won it.
Yeah, those first 2 games were abysmal. They were really scary.
Well, Vic Marsh was the only one who hit for them in that series.
Yeah, their hitting wasn't good. Their starting pitching wasn't bad. And after they lost the 3rd consecutive game when they moved back to Cleveland, the fans were clamoring to see Bob Feller start the 4th game for old time's sake and to give Feller a chance to win a World Series game. It wouldn't have made any difference. They didn't hit enough in the 4th game. I was there, and I think Lemon started, and it was a routine game, relatively routine, and the Giants won and sewed up the series and left 80-some thousand. I don't know how many were there that day, but pretty close probably.
Well, what was interesting is that Alvin Dark came out with a book, over 20 years ago, called When in Doubt, Fire the Manager. And he goes into the 54 series pretty thoroughly, and he said, Giants weren't afraid of them because they used to barnstorm together because those days they were the only 2 teams training in Arizona. So they used to play about 20 exhibitions. And he said basically they had 3 problems. All the starters were right-handed. They were slow on the bases. And they were not great defensively.
That's a very good observation because their only defensive whiz really was George Strickland, shortstop. Yeah. And Rose.
Well, he was in there for his bat,
he was strictly a glove man. They got him from Pittsburgh, and he ended up becoming a better hitter later in his career. But he had a miserable season in '54. And Wirtz didn't have a good season. And Dave Philly, playing right field, had his worst season.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah.
Their batting, they didn't win it on their batting. They won it, but your observation that they really didn't have much going in the lefty department, it hits the nail on the head. They really needed a lefty starter that had some pop and to at least start one game against the Giants, but. All they really had were guys. They had 2 guys in the bullpen: Don Mossy, a rookie, and Hal Newhouser, been in his last season, who came from the Tigers to the Indians strictly as a relief pitcher, and both of them weren't factors in the series. Cleveland just didn't hit. That was basically what it was. But if you look at the 48 team, which I like the best, of course, because It's our last team to win a World Series. They had a solid infield. Everybody in the infield, I think, it was the first infield in history to all hit 20 or more home runs. With Eddie Robinson on first, Joe Gordon on second, Woodrow at short, and Keltner on third. And
one of the things interesting about that is they were all gone by the end of 1950.
That's right.
Okay, Robinson was traded when they got Mickey Verne, early went from Washington. And then when Luke Easton made this big splash, they sent Verne back to Washington for a pitcher named Dick Weik, W-E-I-K, who may have been one of the worst pitchers ever to toe the mound in history.
He was definitely about the wildest pitcher there was.
Yeah,
he was.
And Gordon was gone after 50.
Yeah.
Woodrow had gone over to the Red Sox, and Keltner was gone.
Keltner finished up with the Red Sox too. A few games. But you're right. The 48 season was for Boudreau, Keltner, and Gordon. It was their last big season. After that, they descended to mediocrity. Even by 49, Boudreau wasn't the same player. Gordon definitely had slipped, and Keltner had slipped badly. And none of them really were that old. In today's game with the money they're paying, I'm sure these guys would have stayed in better shape. Found a way to play another year or two of really quality ball. But the incentive wasn't there, and the 49 team got off to a horrible start. And they ended up having a flagpole sitter, a guy who was going to stay up on sit on a top of a flagpole in a little whatever he had, like a little shopping cart or whatever he was in, until they got out of last place or at least got into respectability. And he was up there quite a while. And created quite a sensation in Cleveland. But the 49 team did get back into contention somewhat late in the season, but it was too late to be a factor.
Yeah, you told me also, I remember quite a while ago, you told me that the reason fans booed the hell out of Ray Boone, who succeeded Boudreau at shortstop, was because he wasn't Boudreau.
That's exactly right. Yeah, he had a good arm. He had a very good arm. He had a better arm than Boudreau, and he covered ground, but he wasn't. Boudreau had a sixth sense, and partly because he was the manager and was probably calling most of the pitches, signaling Jim Hegan what to call. So he knew what pitch was coming, and he would actually start to break to a certain spot in the diamond where he thought the ball might be hit, even before the pitch was delivered. And as a result, he got the balls that no shortstop in his day would have gotten to. And speed was not a factor. In fact, he was 4F, because he had, I think, he had some problems with his legs and his feet. And he ended up that year was a great year, one of the greatest years ever by a shortstop. He nearly led the league in batting and was an easy MVP. So that's Cleveland. The 14 team. Jackson was a member of both that team and the 17 White Sox. So here's a guy who also was a member of the best and the worst teams. And we have another guy like that. I think if you look at the St. Louis Browns next, what in your estimation was their best team? 22,
obviously. I think they were better than the 44 team that won the pennant.
They were.
And because there's a guy, William Meade, who wrote a book years ago about baseball in during the World War II. The original title for the book, which I have the original, was Even the Browns.
I thought I did see the book with that. I thought I saw it with that title, maybe in paperback.
Yeah, because they changed the title to some innocuous thing after a couple of printings, and it was, basically, the book basically revolved around the 1944 Browns.
Yeah, it did. It did. And they were, but the 1922 team was really solid. And they missed the pennant by just one game.
Yeah.
And I remember there was a book when I was a kid. You probably read it too. The Greatest Teams in Baseball.
Oh,
and the author chose the top team for what he, in his estimation, was the top team. I can't remember the writer. Maybe you do.
John Carmichael.
It might have been John Carmichael. Yeah, and he picked what, in his estimation, was the best team for each of the 16 franchises then, and he picked 1922, and the title of the chapter was "Close but No Cigar."
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And the 22 team was managed by Lee Fole, who was a solid manager, and he was with Cleveland prior to going over to the Browns, and almost took Cleveland to the 1918 pennant, but was replaced by Tris Speaker, who took them to the 20 pennant. Fole almost, came very close in 22, and overall he was an above 500 manager, but he had some very good teams, and he's never gotten any press that I've ever seen as being a really a good manager or a bad manager. He just kind of falls in the cracks, but he had a substantial managerial career in that period.
There was a book that I have lying around somewhere on the night, exclusively on the 1922 Browns. Yeah, it was, and Sisler was the spark plug on that team without question, because he had really that was his last out. For his 20, it was a great season. Well, he missed the whole season, 1923, with sinus problems.
I know.
And he was never the same after that, yeah.
No, he wasn't. He was never the same player. And the Browns had a solid outfield with Ken Williams and Jack Tobin and Baby Doll Jacobson.
Yeah.
Gerber was a solid shortstop, not much of a hitter. They were weak at third base with Ellerby. And Marty McManus, who was a really underrated ball player, I think, from that time, was their second baseman. And they had a fairly strong team and gave the Yankees all they could handle, and just came up a game short at the very end of the season. And they had two very strong pitchers, not much behind them. They had Urban Shocker and Van Gilder, who Van Gilder won 19 games.
Elam Van Gilder, yeah, I remember that name.
Yeah, that is a name you can't forget.
No.
And behind them, they didn't really have much in the way of quality starters. And they had a guy who really was tough on the Yankees, and in particular, Babe Ruth.
Hub Pruitt, yeah.
Yeah, Hub Pruitt. And I thought if you look back at that team and look at their season stats, you wonder why Pruitt wasn't used more. He got some starts. He usually appeared mostly in relief, and it seemed to me that if they had put him in the starting rotation and maybe dropped one of their lesser starters, that Fole could have maybe pulled it off and won the pennant. I don't know. We'll never know. But certainly that was their best team. And what's your thought on the worst Browns team?
No, I think I was looking at that. I think 1939. I think they won 43 games.
Yeah, 39 and it followed by two. The 38 season was terrible. The 37 season was also terrible. They finished 8th in the American League with Hornsby and Jim Bottomley as player managers.
Yeah,
and they had a terrific team as far as hitting goes, but no pitching. But the 39 team, definitely, you're right. I mean, that's and they, as usual, they finished last in attendance. With barely over 100,000.
When we had the second convention out in St. Louis in 2007, I was sitting next to Bob Tiemann. You know the name?
Oh, yeah. No, Bob well.
Yeah, because we're sitting there before whatever the presentation was. There was a few minutes, and he said, I bet you I'm the only one in this room who can name all the vice presidents. He says, how much do you want to bet? He threw some stuff at me. I answered all of it. But anyway, I asked him about 1935 when they had listed 81,000. I said, did the papers or the Sporting News or whatever have game by game? He said, no. He said the problems were that the team was terrible. It was during the Depression and one of the hottest summers in St. Louis, which can get very, very hot.
Yeah.
I said, you throw in all these three factors, and nobody wanted to go out there.
No,
but they didn't keep.
No.
They weren't going to release 10 to 1,200 or whatever it was. Yeah, but that was interesting. I was really hoping there'd be a game by game on that.
Yeah, it's the Browns were bad, and they saved Connie Mack from looking terrible because his Philadelphia A's were not much better. They stayed out of the cellar a couple of years when they had really cellar quality teams, only because the Browns were in the league. But there were years when both of them lost over 100 games. I think both teams.
Well, they did that in 1954 when they were first year in Baltimore. They won 54 games, and the A's were 51.
Yeah, that's right. If we go on, when they did move from St. Louis after 53.
Yeah.
I was sorry to see them go because I was always kind of the kid, a Browns fan. I liked some of their players, and I liked their uniforms, and they had guys like Zeke Cirilla and Vic Kokas, and they were kind of great names. Kokas never panned out, but he started out like he was going to be a real good ball player.
No, he went into the Army for 2 years after 1950.
And when he came back, he just wasn't the same at all. Yeah, his career was nearly over.
But
he was only about 25 years old.
Yeah, Bill, in fact, bought them with the intention of driving the Cardinals out of St. Louis.
Yeah.
But once he said in his autobiography, once the Bush family decided to buy the Cardinals, he knew it was over. And they wanted to move to Milwaukee before 1953, and those days you had major league teams, possession of minor league territory, and they convinced Perini with the Boston Braves to move there, and then they wouldn't let the Browns go to Baltimore in the American League unless Vex sold out.
Yeah, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah.
But Baltimore, once Baltimore got Paul Richards on board, away from the White Sox, they became by 1960. If you look at the franchise closely, and you include Baltimore as part of the franchise, that 1960 team was pretty strong, and wasn't as good as the 1922 team, but they did give the Yankees a little bit of trouble.
Oh yeah, Yankees had to win in 1960. They had to win 15. Yankees had to win 15 straight games to close that season in 1960.
Yeah. So it's interesting because people do forget that the Baltimore franchise came from St. Louis and probably was close to being, if not the best, close to being the second best St. Louis or Baltimore, that franchise.
Yeah, it's funny.
Expansion.
It's funny because I tried when I was in St. Louis twice for the conventions to get a Browns jacket and cap. I couldn't, and then I go to Camden Yards the first year it was open with a bunch of people. I bought them there, but they didn't have anything to indicate that the Browns are part of their heritage. Now, of course, the Orioles are the worst team in baseball.
They're nearly as bad as those teams in the late 30s. Yeah, it's disgraceful. I don't know what
and of course the '88 team, which opened the year with 21 losses.
Yeah, I think giving Chris Davis that huge contract, that they never recovered from that, really.
They're gonna have to pay him like the Mets pay Monday every year.
Yeah, I know. It's unbelievable.
Okay, who do you want to go to next? The A's or
we only got one team
the A's
left.
last week?
Yeah, we did. The only team we had
did the
left
A's
was the
last
Tigers.
time. Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah, the only team we had left were the Tigers, and my vote goes to the 34 team, which beat the Cubs in the series.
35. That was 35.
35. They lost to the Cardinals in the series, didn't they?
34 they lost to the Cardinals.
34 they lost. Okay,
yeah,
35.
That was the last series where they had two player managers.
Okay, right. Cochran and Frisch, yeah. Okay, well, so you would take the 35 team, and you're right. It's my mistake.
That happens, yeah.
Yeah, but Cochran, I think, was a very good manager, and of course, a great catcher. Nearing the end of his career, but he knew how to spot himself. And when the team, the team took the series, he then never again. He got beaned the following year, and that was pretty much.
I think he got beaten in 37. What happened in 36 was that Greenberg played about a dozen games because he's still recovering from a broken wrist that he got in the World Series, about 35 series.
Was that in the series, or wasn't it a game against the Yankees in 36 with Jake Paul ran into him?
It may have been. I don't know. Really, but I know he played very few games.
I know that
year.
They both suffered excruciatingly awful injuries that pretty much finished the Tigers' chances.
Yeah.
I'm a little confused there in the years myself, but.
He lost almost 4 complete years to World War II.
I know.
Yeah.
He came back in 45.
Yeah.
And he came back in time to homer in the next to last game of the season to give the Tigers the pennant, and probably what some consider to be the most inept season in Major League history, and that somebody had to win this. I can't remember who said somebody had to win the series, but both teams were certainly good enough to lose. So
there was one real interesting thing in that series. Virgil Trucks, who came out of the Army late in that season, was given a special dispensation. I think they were allowed to add 2 or 3 extra players, both teams, who were, serving in the military for most of the season.
Yeah, anybody who came out of the military during the course of the season, regardless of how late, could be added to the World Series roster.
Yeah, and Virgil Trucks won a game in the World Series without winning a game in the regular season.
He made a start, and he made a start in the game that I think the game that Greenberg won with the home run, but I don't think he got the win. It was the last day of the season, so he did appear in one game.
No, he didn't get the win because I tracked that because in 1986.
No, I know he didn't get the win. Yeah, he didn't get the win, but
because he didn't win a game during the season. Yeah, and
no, he didn't.
He didn't. The only other one I've ever found that did something like that, the Red Sox had a reliever in 1986 named Steve Crawford, who didn't win a game of the regular season, and won the second game of that 1986 series when Clemens got knocked out early.
Yeah.
But what's amazing with that, I thought the 1950 team was very good, but they didn't quite make it either. And George Kell is also on the list of Hall of Famers who never made it into the World Series. That was as close. The 50 was the closest he ever got.
It was, yeah.
Now, I was thinking of two other players at the Hall of Famers that didn't. Ken Griffey Jr. never made it, and Ryan Sandberg never made it.
Yeah.
But that's something for another time. I think the worst team, because since the expansion, they've had several really, really horrible teams. The worst was in 2003 when they won 43 games.
Yeah.
43 and 119.
Prior to expansion, they only finished in
1952.
Yeah, that was the only year they ever finished in last place. And it was interesting because they'd been contenders right down to the wire in 1950, and 2 years later, they got off to a terrible start. They lost their first 8 games, and they finished with losing 104 games, finishing a bad 8th. And Red Rolfe, who'd been manager of the year in 1950, when in the second year as a team manager, was fired. I think around mid-season, and replaced by Fred Hutchinson, who was a player manager as a pitcher. Hutchinson continued to pitch a little bit, and remained manager with the team until they eventually ended up with Cincinnati and won a pennant.
Well, they started unloading the players from they weren't too good in 51, and they started unloading all the players from the 50 team.
Well, they made that huge trade with Boston early in the season, where it was one of the probably almost the most biggest trade of its time.
Yeah,
because there were named players going in both directions. Guys like Johnny Pesky and Kell and Hoot Evers and Dizzy Trout. All were changing uniforms. And really, the trade, Walt Dropo, who had been Rookie of the Year in 1950, came to the Tigers. It really didn't change the fortunes of either team to any great extent. Because most of these players, with the exception of Kell, who still had a few good years left, didn't have too much left. Most of them
Hoot Evers went from hitting 323 in 1950 to hitting 224 in 1951.
I know.
And they also got the Tigers also sent Johnny Liphorn over there to Boston. And one of the players going from Boston to Detroit was the ever-popular Bill White, the pitcher.
Right. Was on more bad teams probably than anybody else in that time. He was actually Yankees property, and the Yankees traded him to the White Sox. So he was with the White Sox. He ended up he pitched even with the Browns, and he was with Cleveland briefly, but with a lot of teams, but never emerged. Yankees thought, everybody thought the Yankees were getting rid of a top prospect. Maybe they were if he stayed with the Yankees, but he didn't, and his misfortune was to go to teams that were really pretty horrible.
Well, I got Eddie Lopat in that trade, so it worked out pretty well for them.
Yeah, it did work out.
White was second to in getting traded to the ever popular Dick Littlefield.
Yeah,
I went to the full presentation on his career and all the trades. I written up who he was traded for, who was involved with trades with him. Some interesting conversations. He was involved with trades with Bob Kane and Jim Deltzing, who were, deeply involved with Eddie Gaedel at bat. He was traded with Don Little for and Vic Wirtz. He's involved in trades with them. and he was traded twice in a month. Twice. He was traded in the winter of 50. He was traded 51. He was traded from the Red Sox to the White Sox and then to the Tigers. And I'm sorry. He went to the Browns before he went to the Tigers. And the other way. I'm sorry. And then in 1956, he was traded. The Pirates traded him to the Cardinals with Bobby Del Greco for Bill Varden, which worked out pretty well for the Pirates. And then the Cardinals included him in that the Doc Shanings trade in 57.
Yeah.
And it's 56, I'm sorry, that was 56. And then the Giants were so thrilled to have him that they put him up in a trade for Jackie Robinson, which was nullified by Robinson's retirement. And the Giants were so thrilled to get him back that they sent him to the Cubs the first week of spring training.
Yeah.
I mean, it was unbelievable. I mean, these days, if he was around now, he'd be one of those situation relievers.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, but boy, I don't know what kind of personality he had, but he just bounced and bounced and bounced.
Yeah, he did. Well, we were talking about Virgil Trucks in relation to the 1945 season, his appearance, winning the World Series, which got even the series at one game all. Trucks was on the 52 team and went 5-19. And among his 5 wins were 2 no-hitters and a one-hitter.
Yeah.
He had 3 shutouts. And, he no-hit Washington early in the season.
I know with the Yankees, yeah.
And he no-hit the Yankees later in the season, in August, and that was his last win. And the Yankees started with a left-hander named Bill Miller, who was promising at the time.
Yeah.
And pitched probably the best game of his career. And his misfortune was to hook up with Trucks. And the game was interesting because there was a play in, I believe, the 3rd inning. Rizzuto hit a ground ball to, I believe it was Lippon at short. No, I'm sorry.
Lippon wasn't there anymore. It was Jerry Pretty or Pesky.
No,
No,
it was Pesky. Pesky was playing short. He moved over from the Red Sox. And Pesky thought he threw out Rizzuto at first base. Everybody did, actually, and the Tigers thought he was out. But the umpire called him safe, and they ruled it an infield. The official scorer originally ruled it an infield hit. By the 8th inning, when Trucks was still hanging on to what was then a one-hitter, the decision was changed to an error on Pesky after a call to the dugout where Pesky was put on the phone and said, well, it got stuck in my glove. I couldn't quite get it out. I couldn't get it gripped. So Pesky was charged with an error, which maintained the no-hitter. It was kind of similar to the Ernie Koob no-hitter back in 1917, where an official scorer made a change after the game, taking away a hit and awarding an error instead to, I believe, to a Browns infielder. And so the second no-hitter was questionable, but in the meantime, he could have had another no-hitter against Washington, if not for the first batter in the game, which was Eddie Yost, who singled to start the game when Washington batted in the bottom of the first. And that was the only hit they got all day. They didn't come close to hit the rest of the way. So it was a phenomenal season, one of a kind for Trucks, who...
Yeah.
He worked.
Yeah. No, they traded Wirtz to the Browns in August. And then after that season, they traded Trucks and Johnny Groth to the Browns. And they basically, and then in 53, they sent Art Harriman, who was 8-20 in 1952. In 53, they sent him to the Tigers, and basically for Ray Boone.
Yeah. You mean Cleveland? Yeah.
Yeah,
Cleveland.
yeah. And
yeah.
I've done a couple of times. I've done profiles on trucks on Facebook, and I always put on, because he won in June of '53. He was traded from the Browns to the White Sox, where he became a 20-game winner and a 19-game winner the following year. And I always put down he escaped the Browns.
He escaped the Browns, and he also came to a manager who had been his catcher in the World Series game in 1945 that he won, which is Paul Richards. And Richards did work with Trucks and got Trucks to develop a couple of new pitches. And Trucks, once he came over to the White Sox in '53, became a completely different pitcher. He'd been floundering for most of the previous couple seasons, and even was idle for most of the '51 season with arm trouble.
Yeah, 50. I was 50 where he missed almost the whole season. Probably cost him the pennant. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, 50. Yeah, but when he came over to the White Sox, he developed into a very, very effective pitcher. Unfortunately, it was too late in his career for him to really feast on what he might have done if he had come to Richards, say, 3 years earlier when the Go-Go White Sox came into existence. And it could have been a whole different story for the White Sox and for Trucks.
Well, the thing is, he wound up 177 and 135. That's one of the numbers records that stick to me. And if he had normal years in '52 and '50, where he was 3-1 and missed most of the season with a sore arm, he would have won 200 games.
He would have. And he would be considered one of the stronger pitchers of that era. As it is, he's remembered, but not given the credit he probably deserves for being really a fine pitcher. He had an amazing strikeout record in the minors.
I know that. Yeah.
Yeah, he struck out over 400 batters in a year in something like 1939 or 1940. So they called him Fire Trucks appropriately because he had a terrific fastball when he first came up.
And basically, when they sent him over to the Browns, they also sent Johnny Groth over, who bounced around quite a bit after he left the Tigers the first time. He came back to them toward the end of his career. And Johnny Groth died at the age of 95 a couple of weeks ago. And
I didn't know that.
It said in the obit I read he had 11 kids. I wonder if that's a major league record.
Wow.
A million grandchildren, and 1,000 grandchildren, and 1 million great-grandchildren. I don't know how you find that out. You can't research that.
That is amazing. Yeah, I didn't know that. But I do remember that when he first appeared on the scene, he was regarded almost
the second Babe Ruth.
Second Ty Cobb. The second Ty Cobb is the way Detroit looked down upon him. And he did have a decent rookie season, but he never developed into the player that everyone expected him to be, and ended up having really a relatively mediocre career.
Yeah, because the way I found that out is because there's a book that I have that came out a bunch of years ago, Rose Diaries, which started when he was hired and ended in 1949, and it ended when he was fired in 1952. As he goes into all that stuff, and when they're discussing growth, that they said, the hype on him when he came up from AAA was very, very strong. Yeah,
I remember that, and Ralph was the farm director in Detroit before he was hired as manager. No, he had no expectation. He didn't even apply for the vacant job, and I can't remember who it was. Somebody in the Tigers front office So we might have a guy right in our organization now who could step in, and we wouldn't have to really do a search. What about Rolf? And I don't know what the reaction he drew, but it must have been very favorable because somebody walked down the hall to Rolf's office and said, "I think you need a bigger office, Red." And Rolf said, "Yeah, well, maybe I do." And I got a lot of stuff piled up in the corner. And I'm talking about a really bigger office. I'm talking about being manager next year. So I think Rolf was as surprised as anybody when he got the job. And he was a very effective manager early on, but he wasn't right for that team. There were guys like who were drinkers, guys like Dick Wakefield, really, really problematic cases, Trout, and he wasn't fighting. Newhouser was a very fiery guy. He probably wasn't the guy to bring out the best in that team. Even in 1950, another manager might have brought them over the hump and won the pennant.
Yeah, the catcher on that team was Aaron Robinson, who who had a card in the 51 Bowman, but that was his last card.
He was a pretty good catcher. He was left-handed hitter.
He was one of the most expensive backup catchers of all time because he came up with the Yankees, and they was traded to the White Sox, with Bill White, and they had a low-pat deal, and then the White Sox turned him into Billy Pierce.
Yeah.
Yeah, the story I read on that is that the Tigers gave the White Sox a choice between Billy Pierce and Ted Gray, and for once in their lives back then, they made the right one.
Yeah. That was the offer. I remember that.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices, and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.